What is up, FTN? Welcome in. It's Tuesday. You know what that means. It is the Dream Stream here at FTN Daily, presented to you, as always, by Superdraft Daily Fantasy, alongside two of my good friends. First of all, the Dream Stream OG, Joe Metz. Chris Middleton looking like he's coming back tomorrow, so I'm sure things are looking up in Milwaukee. How you doing today?
Excited. Things are looking up. The weather is, I think, sub 35 right now. So some things are looking up, but I'm doing well. Excited for our third 3-game slate in a row together.
Oh, man, yeah, we gotta work something out with this schedule and get on a longer slate together. 80 degrees and sunny in Central Texas today, so
Beautiful.
you can be envious of that. On the other side of me, the optimizer extraordinaire. Congrats on your big wins last week, sir. Kyle Murray. How you doing, Kyle?
I'm good. I'm kind of in the same boat as Joe. Us Midwestern boys are not doing great with the weather. We got the time change, so now it gets dark at like 2:30 in the afternoon, and it's just brutal. But yeah, luckily last week went pretty well, so it got me out of that kind of seasonal depression. So love the NBA season. That makes things better. So I'm excited to talk some hoops with you guys.
Absolutely, and I'm sure Cade Cunningham's performance last night also extending your break from the seasonal depression up there in the north. Producer Thomas chiming in saying 75 and sunny in Vegas. So me and Thomas enjoying the weather here in mid-November. As these guys alluded to, only 3 games on tonight's slate. A little bit odd with the times, 7:30. Lock for this main slate. Then we've got a 2.5-hour break until that second nationally televised game with Philly at Utah. And then some terrible basketball for the Hammer. Spurs out in LA taking on the Clippers. We can just go game by game, obviously, fellas. No show preceding us. So let's break it down in depth with, about 55 minutes into a lock and only these 3 games. We'll start with what is very clearly the game of the night. Golden State traveling to the East Coast to take on the Brooklyn Nets. Still no Klay Thompson, no James Wiseman, but there's no shortage of good players and players priced attractively, especially on DraftKings as I look down the Warriors side. So Kyle, I'll start with you. Big gap here between Steph Curry and the rest of this Warriors team, but I think some of these moderately priced guys stand out. Where are you looking first? Is it Steph, or are you kind of getting in the weeds with the rest of the depth chart?
A little bit of site dependent with that option there. I mean, on DraftKings, Steph's pretty expensive, but obviously he's better on DraftKings than he is on FanDuel with the 3-point bonus. But on FanDuel, I think my favorite Warrior is actually Jordan Poole. I have him getting some steam in terms of ownership, but it's really tough on a 3-game slate to find someone that is a solid play that isn't going to pick up, 15, 20% ownership. I talked about this in the optimal today during the show. Like if you were looking to force anybody under a certain percent ownership on a normal slate, 10 to 15% is fine. On today's slate, you kind of got to expand that a little bit. So I think on FanDuel, Poole's my favorite. On DraftKings, Steph Curry is probably my favorite Warrior just because of the ceiling that I think he has on DraftKings, but I think, Poole's still fine there. I think Draymond at 6'4" is a pretty solid play there. So I don't have a ton of interest in. So I actually think this game's pretty interesting from a leveraged tournament standpoint because the Nets are probably going to get a ton of ownership. But I think this game could be one that is pretty underwhelming from a fantasy perspective. Both teams are in the top 4 in terms of defensive efficiency, and up until yesterday, they were actually both tied for number 1, which is pretty strange. And they've both been playing fairly slow as well. So this game has the highest total on the board and also has the tightest spread at -3 is where I saw it last. So I think it's going to get a lot of ownership, but the fact that it's 2 really strong defensive teams, obviously there's a lot of really good fantasy producers as well, so I have no doubt that they can get there. But from a tournament perspective, I actually like going underweight on this game and, finding exposure in the 2 later games because I think so much attention is going to be on this one.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with you. But Joe, how are you looking at this first game, specifically the Warriors side?
Yeah, so echoing Kyle, I wrote up Jordan Poole as one of my favorite value plays on FanDuel of the day. He's taken a bit of a backseat in terms of production to Andrew Wiggins lately, but still second to only Steph Curry in usage rate on the team over 25%. He's still getting more touches per game than Andrew Wiggins. And if you want to, again, I don't pay attention a ton to regular season individual matchups, but if you really want to play that card, there's a higher likelihood that Andrew Wiggins will be dealing with someone like Kevin Durant most of the game, as opposed to Jordan Poole, who probably see Bruce Brown if he starts. So I like Jordan Poole quite a bit for under 6K, given the ceiling we know he has on a 3-game slate. But I definitely like, I didn't necessarily, obviously this game tight spread 2.5 right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, 220 total. I didn't necessarily consider a massive fade of this game, but the more you talked about it, Kyle, the more I like it because no one's going to fade this game. I'm assuming the overwhelming majority of lineups are going to have one of Harden, Steph, or KD in them. And then I'm sure, especially on DraftKings, I've seen a lot of Draymond murmurs across the industry simply because of his price. Mm-hmm. So there is some leverage to be had by fading this game. But some of the value, for me, particularly on the Nets side, is actually a little hard for me to get away from if you're running one lineup, though.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that Nets value because obviously Joe Harris will be out for a few games. I think multiple games is the exact quote that we've seen reported. Obviously, Kyrie still remains out, and then Nick Claxton and Paul Millsap also out. Have you guys seen anything on Nick Claxton? Like this non-COVID illness, like it's kind of worrisome. Like I hope the guy's okay.
He's been out for like 2 weeks, and I think they said he's still not even close to returning. So I don't know.
So I mean that obviously opens up solidified minutes for Blake Griffin, for a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge, two guys we've been targeting over the last couple Brooklyn games, and then obviously with Joe Harris out, you're going to have value opening up for Bruce Brown, Patty Mills, who played a ton in the second half of that last game, and then maybe some lower owned guys like a DeAndre Bembry, only small forward on DraftKings, but 3.2K, and I think an interesting tournament play, especially if you're running multiple lineups. So, Joe, I'll stick with you. What are you prioritizing from this Brooklyn value?
I really like LaMarcus Aldridge. I'm worried that he's probably going to be the most popular Brooklyn value, but for sub 5K on DraftKings, I think he's 5.6 on FanDuel. Speaking DraftKings specifically, he's producing over his last 3 games 1.34 fantasy points per minute. He's not getting a ton of minutes. He's around that 22, 23 range. But his permanent production kind of rivals a lot of the spend ups on this slate. So on a slate that is kind of starved for reliable and attractive value, I think Aldridge is a good option, especially in a game that while these are 2 teams that have thrived defensively this year, they are also 2 of the more offensively gifted teams in the NBA, and you're going to need offense to beat the other team. Aldridge is probably going to be the third priority in terms of scorers on this Nets team now. I think you can rival him with maybe like a Patty Mills, but I just think 4.8 is a little too cheap given the tight spread of the game and kind of the situation with the lack of depth and his permanent production right now.
What are you thinking, Kyle?
Yeah, so I mean, I do want to clarify my fade in this game doesn't necessarily mean not play it at all. It's it's pretty tough to just avoid an entire game in general, especially with doing 150 lineups on 3-game slate. It's just tough to do. But I mean, a lot of people could potentially find themselves stacking this game 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 players from this game, playing 1 to 2, maybe even 3. I think would be in some cases lower than the field. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. But on Brooklyn, there's a ton of value. Obviously, Joe Harris is vacating a ton of minutes here. My favorite play from the Nets is Patty Mills on both sites. He's 4K on FanDuel, 3.8 on DraftKings. He's projecting as one of the better point per dollar plays on the slate for me and the best in this game. I think if I had to decide between Durant or Harden, I do prefer Durant, but I think that you're also going to have a lot more ownership on Durant, especially on DraftKings. I have Durant 20% more popular than James Harden. I do have Durant projected for 5 points better, so I do think he is the better play. But on a 3-game slate, sometimes the only reason to play someone over another player is that they're going to be lower owned. That's a good enough reason for me on a 3-game slate. And I know that's maybe not necessarily foolproof, but when you're really trying to game theory out a 3-game slate where there's not a ton of edge here, that's kind of a play that I'm totally fine with. I like them both. I did talk a little bit earlier about playing both these guys in the same lineup. There's ways in the optimizer that you can set rules to have only one of these 2, and I think that's a smart route to take, especially in the optimizer. You can set that rule in a certain amount of lineups. So if you're building 100 lineups, you can say, I want this rule to where I can only play one of those 2 in 20 lineups or whatever the number you decide on. But that's a route that I'm taking to where I'm going to avoid playing those guys together a lot, because I think if one of them has a massive ceiling game, that probably hurts the other one. I agree with Joe. I like Aldridge more so on DraftKings. 4.8, I think he's totally fine over there. And I actually don't have him getting that popular. I've met about 13%, which is like the 6th highest net alone. So I have Patty Mills, Bruce Brown, Blake Griffin, and then the 2 studs, KD and Harden, getting more projected ownership. So I actually think Aldridge is a pretty sneaky play. Yeah.
So if you're going to pair guys like James Harden and Kevin Durant together, if you say you made a rule for a couple lineups for that in the Opta, would you want to run it back with Steph Curry or an Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and you're saying this game's going to stay close, maybe catch an overtime on a short slate? Is that something you would be looking to do, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be tough to hope that Harden and Durant both get there in a blowout.
Yeah.
I don't think this game's going to blow out anyway, but in the case where they both get there, I think it's one of those really fruitful fantasy environments, whether it's one that goes to overtime or maybe one that's just super close and a lot of scoring. So I don't think you necessarily need to say it has to be Steph, but someone like Poole or Wiggins or even Draymond, I definitely would want somebody. Someone put a question in the chat that asking about 3 Nets and no Warriors. I think that's okay, especially if it's maybe one of the spend ups and 2 of the cheaper guys, because those cheaper guys are such good values to where I think that's fine.
So, Joe, with Harden and Durant, it's kind of been tough this entire season to choose which one, especially when we find ourselves on a short slate like this, and you feel like, especially if you're running multiple lineups, like I have to get exposure to these guys. More often than not, it's been Kevin Durant over James Harden in a raw point perspective. That's been the answer. But we've seen some big James Harden games over the last 8 to 10 days or so. Are you with Kyle and myself? Are you prioritizing Durant over Harden, or are you looking more to Harden, who on DK is now point guard only?
So for me, it's going to depend on field size and how many lineups you're playing. If you are playing small field, one lineup, I probably will opt for Kevin Durant. I feel more confident in Durant in this game, but there is leverage to be had given his ownership relative to the projected ownership for Harden. And we know, especially with DraftKings scoring system, there are so many avenues for Harden to smash. Like, he's obviously a much better bet to have a triple-double than Kevin Durant, even a double-double. If he catches fire from 3, Durant shoots threes, but not nearly as many as James Harden shoots. So there are so many more avenues, I think, for James Harden to hit a massive ceiling, where there are still a lot for Kevin Durant, but I don't know if there's quite as many. So I like the leverage call quite a bit. On FanDuel, I am a little more inclined to just stick with Kevin Durant for 10-6. James Harden does have shooting guard and point guard eligibility. He's 10-2 over there, and I understand the appeal. But if I'm squeezing in, say, 2 studs, I'd rather just save $200 and go Paul George, who has more stock upside on FanDuel than James Harden.
Yeah, to both of your points, positionally, it's different on every site, and DraftKings 100%. Specifically, with Paul George now getting shooting guard eligibility over there, you look at the guys surrounding Harden, Steph Curry, Paul George, looking down the salary tier here, DeJounte Murray, Donovan Mitchell, who we'll get into, and then you go to forward, and it's kind of KD and Paul George up top. So that also plays a factor in what would be my decision if I was playing to go with Kevin Durant over James Harden. How about some of these kind of bargain basement guys? I mentioned DeAndre Bembry. I think it's possible he could slide into the starting lineup if Nash wants to kind of keep that second unit together. And then you look on the Warriors side, if this game goes small, and I think it could, a guy like Nemanja Bjelica could maybe get out there, bang a couple threes, and get on top of his 3-3 price tag. We saw Damian Lee come back and not play a ton against Charlotte, but we know in spots this year he's played into the mid to high 20s in minutes. 3-2 guard forward eligible. He kind of looks like an attractive option. And then the last guy I'll mention before tossing it to you, Kyle, Kavon Looney, center only, but 3.5 on DraftKings specifically, and been just over a fantasy point per minute guy. I mean, with Blake out there, LaMarcus Aldridge, like maybe he gets into the low 20s and low owned 3.5 could be an interesting option.
Yeah, I don't hate the Looney call, especially at a position where I don't know if it's as stacked as we've seen as, in the larger slates where center is not as strong tonight. But there are a couple of other value options that I probably have a little bit more interest in at the center position. So that's probably why I don't get to Looney a ton. But I mean, 3,500, that's saving more than you can than with some of those other options. So I don't mind that. If you wanted to play some sort of blowout narrative, on DraftKings, going to someone like Gary Payton, I don't hate, but it's not really something that I'm looking to chase a ton. But on a 3-game slate, building 150 lineups, maybe 2 or 3%, I don't hate it. If this game does somehow blow out, he's been over 1.1 fantasy point per minute on FanDuel, and he's 1.08 on DraftKings this year. So I don't hate that, but he probably doesn't get a ton of minutes. I have him at 16, but if the game somehow goes in a strange way, it's kind of the same narrative with Damian Lee. I think Damian Lee has a more realistic minute ceiling to where the game can kind of just play out in its natural state and he can have those, mid 20s minutes. I don't think Peyton really gets that unless something weird happens. But yeah, that's just pretty much the bargain bin guys I'm looking at.
Oh, how about you?
I actually like the Damian Lee call quite a bit. There is a minutes floor here, but I really don't think that floor is sub 15 minutes, 15, 16, and he has been a decent permanent producer. He also, not that you need to open up a ton of salary on this slate, but he brings a similar range of outcomes to people priced a couple $100 more than him and allows you to kind of get up to a player like potentially Rudy Gobert over for, I think he's 7-7. If you need money to save, going from someone mid-fours down to Damian Lee to get Rudy Gobert instead of Draymond Green, something like that. I think kind of depending on my build, I'm okay slotting some of these guys in as a last man in. I actually kind of feel the opposite way about Kavon Looney today. He's a good fantasy producer. The way I view this game environment is that it will go small. I can see a lot of LaMarcus Aldridge at the 5, potentially even some Kevin Durant at the 5, and Golden State will just shift Draymond to the 5 in either one of those scenarios. I also, just as a basketball fan, think they're a more effective team when Draymond plays the 5, and against an opponent like this, you might want that advantage. So Kavon Looney, my worry with him is that he could top out at potentially 14, 15 minutes in this game, being center only. If you are high on a Rudy Gobert, you are high on a Draymond and LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, you are very limited with what you can do if you roster Kavon Looney in that front court.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do think that, kind of the matchup against Brooklyn lends more towards Draymond maybe getting into that low to mid 30s in minutes. And at that price, if that's how you think this game plays out, then you got to have a lot of interest in a guy like Draymond Green at that price. Anything else from this game? Or are we good to move on to Salt Lake City?
I think we move on, unless you have anything, Kyle.
No, I'm all set.
Philadelphia at Utah, the second nationally televised game tonight. Philadelphia still shorthanded, obviously, without Ben Simmons, Sixers legend, and Joel Embiid still working his way back from the COVID protocols. So we get another night with Andre Drummond starting at center, priced up to 8.7 on DK, down to a 1.2x multiplier on Superdraft. And then you've got, Tobias Harris back from the COVID list, playing a ton of minutes for a guy who was supposedly going to be limited and experienced some mild symptoms when he did have COVID, averaging 36 minutes per game in the 2 that he's been back. And we want to talk about minutes, fellas. Tyrese Maxey, 41 minutes per game over his last 5, just an outrageous minutes load for the sophomore guard. So let's stick at the top here with Philadelphia. I think a lot of these guys are viable, specifically on DraftKings and on Superdraft. But I don't think you want to have a ton of ownership. Like getting more than one of these Philadelphia guys is tough. So Joe, how do you feel about the top of the Sixers depth chart?
So I like it as a way to differentiate your lineup. If this were a 10-game slate, I'd probably have very little interest because there is a very high chance Utah just blows the brakes out of this game. But on a 3-game slate, I really don't care about blowouts, if I'm being honest. My favorite on FanDuel specifically of the spend-ups, I don't mind Tyrese Maxey for 8,100, but I actually like Andre Drummond for 8,500 a bit more given his permanent production. I think we see a minute ceiling on of him around 38, 39 minutes because if the game stays close, to counter Rudy Gobert any way he can because they play such a big front court. I think he will be needed there. Not an easy matchup by any means, but one that Drummond is going to be fine to exploit. I don't mind Tobias Harris whatsoever on FanDuel for 7.7. That price just has not, regardless of the matchup, it has not caught up to the usage bump and the peripheral bumps that he sees with not only Joel Embiid out, but Ben Simmons as well. So FanDuel, I would actually probably both sides. I would prioritize them. I think I'd go Tobias Harris, Drummond, Maxey.
And I was muted. It's been a while. Since I did that, especially in a 3-man stream. Kyle, how are you breaking down the top of Philadelphia?
I thought my computer died. I was looking at
I was sitting here like,
in the stream, it's your turn to speak. That is my rule.
So I think this game's pretty interesting. Like I mentioned, I do think a lot of ownership is going to filter towards that first game. And on DraftKings specifically, I don't think anybody on Philly is going to be overly popular. I have Korkmaz as the most popular option at 28%, which that might be pushing the line of being overly popular. But like Tobias at 17, Drummond at 11, Maxey at 11, Steph Curry at 8, Niang at 7. On FanDuel, a little bit different story where Tobias is 43% projected ownership, and Drummond and Korkmaz are between 22 and 25. But I mean, Tyrese Maxey, I think, is a really good tournament play. I shouldn't say only 7,200. I mean, that's a massive price for Tyrese Maxey based on what we've seen over the course of the last year and a half. But if he's going to play 40 minutes and he's going to be 11% owned on a 3-game slate, I know it's tough to continually project a guy for 40 minutes, but they have no issue doing it. I have him at 38 minutes, and I think that could be a safe, conservative minutes projection. So at 7,200, he might be one of my favorite tournament plays. We've seen some ceiling games out of him recently, and it kind of reminds me of Cole Anthony from last night, right? Where he got this usage bump with no Jalen Suggs, but people didn't really flock to it like maybe they should have because of the sticker shock. Cole Anthony was a mid 5K player last year, kind of same deal with Maxey earlier this year was mid 5K. Now you find him up in the 7K range on DraftKings, 8K on FanDuel, and people are just staying away from it on a 3-game slate. I think that's tough to just ignore it because it's a little bit expensive. Plenty of value on the slate to where you can open it up to afford him. So he's a really interesting play. Same kind of narrative for Tobias Harris. I mean, 17% for a guy who, small sample, but over 31% usage rate with Embiid off the floor this season. He's gonna shoot the ball. There's no doubt about that. I guess with the point that Zach made about they wanted to potentially limit his minutes. Doesn't seem like they're going to. So I have no issue with it. I really like the Sixers tonight. I love Drummond. I agree with Joe completely. I have him at 11% on DraftKings, 22 on FanDuel in terms of the projected ownership. I think both those numbers are fine. FanDuel might be a little bit high, but I'm okay with it. DraftKings, I think it's too low. So Harris, Drummond, and Maxey, I really like. And then the group behind those guys, Curry, Korkmaz, Niang, and Milton. I'm setting a rule to where I only get one of those guys in each lineup. So, or not each lineup, but at most one in each lineup, because I think a lot of these guys kind of do similar things, especially with Curry, Korkmaz, and Niang, where if one of them gets hot and they're hitting 6, 7 threes, the other one's probably not going to be doing that. So I'm probably going to limit my my groups of those guys to just one.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And you look at a site like Superdraft, especially those 3 guys at the top for Philadelphia. Andre Drummond sitting at a 1.2x multiplier, which we'll get to Rudy Gobert here in a second, but the same as Rudy Gobert and not a ton of center options on this 3-game slate on Superdraft. So I like going to Drummond where they're the same multiplier over there, especially in the large field tournaments. Tobias Harris, 1.25x at the forward position. And Tyrese Maxey, 1.55x at the guard position. Just upgraded him to a 10. Joe, don't give me that look.
I'm just curious who priced those guys.
I have no idea. That guy must be a total dingus. I just bumped him up to a 10. I mean, 40 minutes out of Tyrese Maxey, even if he's not producing at the same rate that we've seen over the last 5 games, that's still a prime play tonight, in my opinion, at that multiplier. So before we flip over to that Utah side, obviously big favorites. I know that we've got people watching on YouTube, people watching on Twitter with our free shows this year. And you hear us answering questions from the FTN Daily Discord. And if you want to get your questions answered by us, or if you're just struggling at all with your NBA DFS to start the season, you should check out ftndaily.com. Our NBA package includes a state-of-the-art optimizer that covers every slate every day, proprietary player and ownership projections from Kyle Murray, the guy sitting to my left, and Alex Blickel helping him out with that each and every day. We've got NBA on-off splits, the advanced DVP tools, which I love to use in the past when I could play, the infamous FTN Daily NBA Premium Discord channel that I just mentioned, and rankings every day from Fast Eddie Fear and myself, compiling those so everybody can sift through for DraftKings and Superdraft. All of that stuff in the NBA package here at ftndaily.com every single day. Pricing starts at $49.99 per month. And if you use the code FTNTV scrolling right below us here, that's good for 15% off every month. To repeat, that code is FTNTV, and that equals 15% off every month of your subscription here at ftndaily.com. So come join us. And when you join the Discord, make sure you tag myself, Joe, and Kyle. Say hi. We would love to have you. Utah, as I mentioned, big favorites here at home tonight in the elevation, and the price is pretty much down across the board from what we've been used to with this team so far this year. And for me personally, the only 10 in Eddie and I's rankings today, a little sneak preview for those freeloaders on YouTube and Twitter. Rudy Gobert, the only 10 on DraftKings today at 7.7. I think he's absolutely underpriced by probably about $700 or $800. So I love getting to Rudy Gobert. He would be a major building block for me on DraftKings. But Joe, how are you treating this Utah team?
Rudy Gobert, to me or you, is also a core play for myself. Simply price, and you look at matchup, this is one where he's going to need to be on the court. Despite them being, I think, 10.5-point favorites last time I looked, I not only Rudy Gobert, I am really close to making Donovan Mitchell a core play as well. 8-6 on DraftKings, 8-8 on FanDuel is just, that's a price on a 3-game slate where I will play anytime, especially with, I think more people are going to spend up for both Paul George and Kevin Durant, on a site like FanDuel. That leaves some leverage to be had if you kind of save a little bit and spend down for Donovan Mitchell at 8-8, which I like quite a bit. You pair him with Tobias Harris and one of the two small forwards, I guess shooting guard small forwards, and Durant and Paul George. That's probably my favorite building strategy. If this game does blow out, sure, Rudy Gobert could be a reason, but he's never going to have that offensive explosion that Donovan Mitchell has, or he is one of, I'd say, like the 4 players on the slate with 50 raw point upside.
Kyle, are you kind of in lockstep with Joe there, or how are you approaching the Jazz?
Yeah, pretty much in lockstep. Gobert is super cheap on DraftKings, or I shouldn't say super cheap, but he's underpriced at 7,700 in comparison to some other players in the slate. So I think he's fine for ceiling. I'm always fine with rostering Donovan Mitchell. We have found him in a couple of spots where he was just a bit lower owned on smaller slates, and that's not really going to be the case today. I don't think I've met about 30% on both sites, but I'm fine with that number if you get to him. I agree with everything Joe said, where not many people on the slate have the same kind of ceiling that he does. So yeah, I think those two are totally fine. But behind those guys, it's kind of tough. I kind of have to try to sell myself on some of these guys. Like, I think O'Neal's fine on DraftKings as a value option, but I don't love his ceiling, even though we've seen some pretty significant ceiling games from him recently, and he's going to play at least 30 minutes. I'm at 31 if the game, plays out normally. But on FanDuel, I think you can make a better case for some of these secondary options like Conley and Bogdanovich, and even Jordan Clarkson, I think is okay. Clarkson's kind of a guy that I think is a really good 3-game slate type play, because he's probably not going to be able to project him for a ton of minutes or project him for like a great floor. But if he gets hot and he starts scoring a ton, like those are the kinds of players that I like, those really good permanent producers that can just have a hot game that people probably won't flock to because projections aren't loving him, because he's not really projected for a ton of minutes. So I think Clarkson kind of fits the bill for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And looking at those FanDuel prices, man, that Mike Conley price is way too cheap.
It's really, really low,
in my opinion. But the thing about this Utah team is they don't run a deep rotation, so there's not a ton outside of those guys that we just discussed. But I think it's interesting, again, short slate, large field tournament, you got to get weird somewhere usually to take it down. And so if I was running multiple lineups, obviously you're not stacking the 2 Utah centers, but Hassan Whiteside at 4-1 is pretty sneaky in my opinion. And you're going to need most likely some foul trouble or a blowout here, which could certainly happen. Quinn Snyder, one of the coaches that does like to run his guys longer at home, even when they are blowing teams out. But you look at Whiteside, and if you know anything about this player, like, he doesn't need extra run really to get on top of this 4-1 price tag on the right night. He can pick up multiple stocks and double in the right match. You look back 4 games against Orlando, 14 minutes, 12 and 10 double with a block for good measure, like 26.5 DK. You'd be really happy with that tonight. So again, certainly wouldn't stack those guys, but Joe, how many lineups would you have to be in before you took a shot on Hassan Whiteside? 10, 15, 20?
10. I think 10. But it's less than I think people think, especially because of the slate size. Like, there's a good part of me that would rather take a shot on Hassan Whiteside at his projected ownership than Isaiah Hartenstein, who I know I've been seeing some steam across the industry. Based off matchup, I would rather take a shot on Whiteside today.
Kyle, any sort of Whiteside interest for you, or is it just, maybe if you get 2% in your crunch or something like that?
No, yeah, he's like the exact type play as Clarkson, right? Where probably not going to get as many minutes as Clarkson, but as a better permanent producer. So, and like you mentioned, he doesn't necessarily need to have Gobert get into foul trouble or something like that to pay off this price tag, especially on DraftKings, where you can roster someone in the utility spot as well. FanDuel may be a bit tougher, where you don't have that flexibility there, but some of the guys who have center eligibility on FanDuel also have loose power forward eligibility, so you can make it work. But I think that's a really good call, and he kind of fits the same mold as Clarkson, where he can get hot on a permanent basis, and in 16, 17 minutes. We've seen him do it before. two fantasy point per minute type performances. So I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up 25 or 30 points, and that's definitely good enough at the price tag.
Yeah, absolutely. Ain't nobody doing it with blocks, though. You can look that up later. Warriors coach Steve Kerr says that Gary Payton II, a.k.a. the Little Glove, will play tonight at Brooklyn. In fact, Gary Payton II will be one of 3 or 4 guys who gets a shot at defending Kevin Durant. So maybe pushing more chips on the Durant over Harden side, if that is the case. I mean, there's really nobody in the league that can.
Isn't Gary Payton
guard.
like 6'4"?
Yeah, he's nowhere near the 7-foot monster that Kevin Durant is. So I would imagine Kevin Durant will be licking his chops for every minute that Gary Payton spends on him. The Nets will start Harden, Mills, Brown, Durant, and Griffin. So Patty Mills is in fact getting the start. Naraki saying Aldridge not starting. I don't think we really expected that. The Griffin's been starting at the 5 with Millsap and Claxton out. Finishing up this game, anything else from either Philadelphia or Utah? Seth Curry, Shake Milton coming off the bench, Furkan Korkmaz, Georges Niang, Joe, any of those guys interest you?
No, I think, again, we've talked about on 3 game slates in the past. I think Utah's been on a lot of the ones us 3 have talked about. But on a slate like this, similar to why Kyle likes a player like Jordan Clarkson, same sentiment for Bojan Bogdanovic. If he catches fire from 3, they will continue to feed him. He can rack up 7-8 threes in a game. So I think if you are MME, I would definitely have some Bojan as well.
Kyle, I know you kind of talked about some of these guys in the lower range, but, Korkmaz, Niang, Milton, which of those guys would you prioritize, if any?
Yeah, Korkmaz does project as the best for me on a point per dollar basis on both sites, but with the ownership being very high, I'm at 29%, while Curry and Niang are both under 8%. I don't mind pivoting there. I like Curry a good amount. We know he can get hot from 3, especially on DraftKings where you get the bonus there. So in an optimal standpoint, I definitely prefer Korkmaz, especially on DraftKings. But on FanDuel, I don't mind pivoting off of Korkmaz to Curry, and I don't mind getting the Curry either on DraftKings.
Yeah, Seth Curry, 1.75x on Superdraft today. Another one of those Philadelphia guys that is viable over there. Let's go ahead and move on to this late night hammer. The San Antonio Spurs visiting the Los Angeles Clippers. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard's still out for the Clippers. Marcus Morris Sr. also out. Terrence Mann, questionable. Probably the biggest piece of news that we are waiting on from this late night hammer on the Spurs side. Jakob Poeltl remains out, alongside a myriad of G League-esque guys, Zach Collins, Jock Landale, a bunch of other guys down in the G League still. Also, Serge Ibaka down in the G League for the Clippers. So let's start with the home team here, because I think that's where we need probably the most attention in this game because of Terrence Mann being questionable. I guess, Kyle, we'll start with you. First, your lean. You think Terrence Mann is in or out? And then what are you doing with that information?
I hope he sits, because he was the reason why I dropped down the other day. I was actually tied for first in that contest the other day, and Terrence Mann made that bucket with 20 seconds left. And now he's on the injury report. I mean, if you're in the game up 25 and making a bucket with 18 seconds left, you better be hurt, man. I mean, this injury better not be fake. That's all I'm saying. I guess I trend towards him playing, just the fact that, like I mentioned, he played 30, I think it was 32 minutes in a blowout game. So I haven't read into it where he picked up the injury, if it was in a game or whatever. I'm assuming it was in that game, but I am leaning right now, like I am projected into play. So that's kind of my lean right now. But I don't really have a massively strong take on it. I'm just projecting him in because of the fact that he played in that blowout game.
Sure. I lean that he is going to play tonight. It doesn't sound like, I feel like if it was more serious, we would have heard a little bit more about this. Still kind of unclear, as you alluded to, where he picked up this ankle injury. But Joe, what are you thinking with Mann, and what are you doing with that?
I think he's in as well. And I think what you just said is everyone's curious where he picked it up. I think that's why I think he's in, because there wasn't anything like groundbreaking. Like no one saw a major injury or anything. He stayed in the game. If he tweaked it during the game, he clearly was able to finish it out, unless he tweaked his ankle literally walking to the locker room. So I have confidence that he's in. But I think, to Herm's point in the Discord, one way to get different is to build as if he's out and just throw in someone like a Luke Kennard. If you want to get really weird, someone like a Justice Winslow, who saw 20 minutes last time he played and dirt cheap. But the problem is, like, I see you pointing at me, Zach. I know that the floor is here where he could legitimately be a DMP. I don't think he will be, but like there's like a 2 or 3 minute off the bench floor. What is your take on why he saw 20 minutes in his last game before he was out? I believe for personal reasons. Last game.
It was blowout. I'm pretty sure. I mean that Clippers Bulls game, I believe it was. Or maybe I'm pulling up the wrong. I think I have the wrong game chart here. Anyways, that was when I looked earlier. It seemed like it was pretty much just kind of blowout related, but we know Justice Winslow is somebody when he gets the minutes, guard forward eligible at minimum price, usually around a fantasy point per minute, probably slightly under for his career, but and only in play for me if Terrence Mann is out. But if you're building that way, he's somebody I would go to, especially with, you mentioned Luke Kennard, I think would be, say we got that news now, or even after the first game locks.
Luke Kennard would be very popular,
yeah. And I think we all know what Luke Kennard can do in terms of letting you down if he's not shooting the ball well. Not saying that he wouldn't be a strong value. He obviously would be, but I think Justice Winslow would be a very attractive tournament play in my mind if Terrence Mann is in fact ruled out. Let's go back to the top here, though, because Paul George is down to 10-2. The Spurs have been a stingy enough defensive team and sticking in a lot of these games, even though they continue to lose. Their wing defense is not really their strong suit in terms of positionally. Like Jakob Poeltl's a fantastic rim defender. He's out. Obviously, DeJounte Murray, Derek White are a pretty darn good duo defensively. But then you're taking on guys like, sophomore Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, who I just don't think either of those guys are at a point yet where they can really hope to slow down Paul George in any meaningful way. And again, guard forward eligible now, Paul George down near 10K. Kyle, is that somebody you're prioritizing up top?
Sort of. I know that doesn't really answer the question. Durant is my favorite spend up option. But if I'm not using Durant, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go to Paul George. He's my second favorite. So I haven't really decided. I know this is going to sound bad because we're 20 minutes away from lock, but I haven't really decided how often I want to use both of them. Just because I think that you can get pretty contrarian by using like three guys like I'm just going to rattle off some names: DeJounte Murray, Tobias Harris, Donovan Mitchell, like those kinds of guys in that range. Because I think a lot of people are going to try to force in Paul George and Kevin Durant and then use some sketchy value, which I think is fine because it's a 3-game slate. So if you want to take a shot on those value guys hitting, then obviously I think Paul George and Durant have massive ceilings. But if those value guys miss, or if maybe one of those top spend up options don't really live up to their ceiling, I think that kind of balanced mid-tier build could be really successful in tournaments. So that's kind of the long answer. But my short answer is that Paul George is my second favorite spend up, while KD is my first.
Gotcha. And two of the guys that I guess I should say three of the guys that we kind of overlooked when we started talking about Terrence Mann are those starting guards. And obviously Eric Bledsoe has been performing really great for fantasy managers. 31 minutes per game in his last 6 and just under a fantasy point per minute. So Joe, price is coming up to 5-2, short slate. You've got Reggie Jackson on DraftKings, 900 more at the guard spot. I think a lot of people are going to flock to Eric Bledsoe with the recent performance and the discount. Yeah. I think I would prefer, if I have the salary, to go Reggie Jackson over Eric Bledsoe tonight. But how are you breaking down those Clippers guards?
I think both are extremely viable on a 3-game slate. As inefficient as Reggie Jackson has been, I think that he still is the number 2 option for this Clippers team. But Bledsoe is my preference, and that's probably the one time this year that'll come out of my mouth.
Please.
I don't know if I'm going to get to him at 6K on FanDuel when you have Jordan Poole at 5.7, Mike Conley at 5.7. But there is, I think if you look at peripherals alone, there's a much higher ceiling than Reggie Jackson. So if Reggie Jackson's shot isn't falling, it's going to be very hard for him to beat out Eric Bledsoe.
Yeah, and obviously neither of those guys in a great matchup, but both very affordable. Kyle, are you with Joe where you're sticking with Eric Bledsoe for the discount?
Yeah, especially on DraftKings. He's projecting as a really solid value play. I have him at 5.9x his salary over there. I was actually doing the optimal show earlier, and Bledsoe was appearing as the most popular play for me early on in the day. And Joe commented that he had to leave. So
Yeah, I
fortunately,
left.
yeah, unfortunately, I lost a viewer there. But I mean, it's tough for him to keep him on the lineups on DraftKings. I do think he's a really strong play, and if you are in a spot where maybe you're like me and you're considering maybe doing one of those top two guys, KD or Paul George, like if it is KD, I think using, like if you don't have Paul George, you should instantly try to boost up one of Bledsoe or Reggie Jackson, if not both. I think they both make a ton of sense if you're not using Paul George. I mean, these are the guys that are putting up the shots here. If Man does sit, I really like Justice Winslow. I think you'd be a really good tournament play. So yeah, right now, if you don't have Paul George, I would recommend trying to get more of Reggie and Eric Bledsoe.
So right below those two, and a lot of talk kind of about this Clippers front court, not necessarily about these two players, but Nick Batum, 5K flat, Ivica Zubac, 4.9K on DraftKings. This is a game that I think with the Spurs personnel, like we've seen Drew Eubanks, he should continue to get the start here, but never a guy that Popovich wants to play big minutes. It's looking like, 22, 23 is about where he's going to come in. And Thad Young, is not physically a center. Thad Young is 6'8". So we know the Clippers like to go small. They've been, the lineup has been a little bit prohibitive for Coach Lue in terms of going small as frequently as he likes to. But I think we could see some small ball going on here today. So Kyle, Nick Batum, still a strong play for you at 5K, or would you prioritize somebody like Zubac going up against a front court of Drew Eubanks and Thad Young?
Yeah, so Batum, I think, is a fine play on DraftKings at 5K. He's probably a guy I pass on FanDuel where he's 6K and still getting 21% projected ownership. But on DraftKings, I think he's totally fine. After that, though, Zubac and even Hartenstein, who, I'm not going to lie, I didn't really see that he was getting this popular on FanDuel. 38% projected ownership.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. I mean, he's basically... And if the game plays out as expected right now with 7.5 total, like if the game ends in a 7-point spread, like he's probably going to get like between 15 and 17 minutes, maybe even the floor is like 14 minutes. But he's a really good per minute producer, so that's why I liked him on a 3-game slate. But I was not expecting this much ownership, so that is really kind of pumping the brakes on that for me. So I do think Zubac makes sense. I don't necessarily know if this is a game where he goes out and plays 32 minutes. I have him at about 25.5 right now, but you mentioned it's going to be a pretty undersized matchup across him, whoever it is, right? So I think he's fine here, especially on DraftKings where he's under 5K. On FanDuel, there's a reason why Hartenstein's more popular because he has power forward eligibility, so he is a little bit more viable over there. But I mean, you can still play Eubanks, you can still play Thad Young, you can still make a few things work. I mean, Hartenstein is a lot cheaper than those guys, but there's ways that you can kind of get off this chalk if you want to. I'm still going to have some of them because I think he is really affordable for the upside that he has. If he gets 16 minutes and he puts up, 20, 21, 22 points. I mean, I have him projected for 21 on FanDuel and 20.7 on DraftKings. So the model really likes him. So I'm going to have a little bit of Hartenstein, but the ownership is giving me pause.
Yeah. So Joe, Isaiah Hardenstein, also a guy, if this game goes sideways for San Antonio and we see blowout run, he's usually pretty safe in a blowout for the Clippers. So at 3.5, a ton of love in the FTN NBA Discord for Hardenstein over the last hour. Are you with him, or are you with Kyle, especially on FanDuel, pumping the brakes at high ownership?
So for me, it sounds like a cop-out answer. It's kind of relative to my build. Like what I'm making on FanDuel right now, like he's only 4K, and there's really not many options, especially in the front court. Blake Griffin at 3.9, I would put in 10 out of 10 lineups over Isaiah Hartenstein right now. But there is on a 3-game slate a legitimate ceiling here and your opportunity to take a shot. So I don't hate it. I don't love the power forward only eligibility on FanDuel. I believe, is he center only on? He is center only on DraftKings. So a 3.5's fine. But the center only, I think, is more of a deterrent for me than the potential floor, if I'm being completely honest, because as of right now, I really like Rudy Gobert. I want one of Blake Griffin or LaMarcus Aldridge. I think you can pair them. It just leaves very little room for Isaiah Hartenstein in my build. But I don't love it, but you can't hate it on a 3-game slate. This was a 10-game slate. There's no way I'd be talking about it.
Obviously, we'll be on the lookout for that Terrence Mann news whenever it does hit, and we'll definitely pop up in the FTN NBA Discord at that time later on this evening, unless it somehow comes out in the next 13 minutes and change. We'll flip over to the visiting Spurs, and as I was telling you guys before we went live, kind of unfortunate that the Spurs are kind of moderately priced, and we're on this 3-game slate where we have to consider them. Especially since they are, I think it's a 7.5 point spread right now. So nothing outrageous. DeJounte Murray priced up to 9.5 on DraftKings, 1.2x on Superdraft. I think both of those are warranted. I like the 1.2x on Superdraft a good bit. And I think 9.5 on this slate where he's in between guys like James Harden and Donovan Mitchell, I think he could go a little bit under-owned. And we've seen in close games this year, Popovich is playing him 35 to 38 minutes. And a lot of sites haven't really adjusted for his new rates. Like with obviously Aldridge is long gone, but DeMar DeRozan being off this team is giving him a ton more usage. And Murray moving into third on the all-time triple-doubles list for the franchise last game. Certainly not putting in the call for another triple-double tonight, but I think he's a really attractive play on all sites. So, Joe, how are you treating DeJounte Murray, who is at a full 3,500 more in salary on DraftKings than the next closest Spur, or next highest priced, I should say?
I like him quite. I like him quite a bit. I think if I'm running one lineup, I don't know if he'll make it simply from just a salary construction standpoint. But I really don't, like Kyle mentioned earlier, that whole mid-range and Donovan Mitchell, maybe not so much, but Tobias Harris and DeJounte Murray, relative to a 3-game slate, are not going to be as popular as they should be. So I like Murray a lot. I think he has one of the highest ceilings on the slate, and people don't really consider him to be that. Like, he has a 65 to 70 DraftKings point ceiling if this game scripts correctly. If he has like a 25 to 30 point, 15 assists, 10 rebound, triple-double, he has the ability to be an absolute slate breaker. So I would, if I'm running more than one lineup, I would 100%. If I'm running 2 lineups, I will have one with DeJounte Murray. I just don't know if he'll make my cut with one.
Music to my Spurs fan ears. Kyle, how are you treating DeJounte Murray? And then kind of get into some of these mid-range Spurs plays.
Yeah, DeJounte Murray is maybe my favorite play of the night. I like him. Yeah, I like him a lot just because, like Zach mentioned, I think a lot of not only sites but DFS players aren't accounting for some dramatic changes that he's seen. I mean, 27% usage on the season, 1.3 fantasy point per minute. I mean, Zach mentioned he didn't want to call a triple-double, but I have him projected for 21, 9, and 9. So I have him pretty close as a median projection. So I wouldn't be surprised if he racks up another one here. Sub 15% on both sites, 15 on FanDuel, 10 on DraftKings. He's 5th in the player rater on DraftKings, 4th on FanDuel. So the model loves him. I love him. I love the ownership. He's going to be a guy that I try to force in. And again, there's just so many guys here, and he's probably the headline of this where there's mid-range players that just aren't really getting a ton of attention. And you can definitely make Kevin Durant or Paul George and then maybe 2 of these 8 to 9K guys work, and then use the value guys. And then you're instantly going to be contrarian and still have that ceiling.
Joe, Keldon Johnson up to 6K, but with Jakob Poeltl out, he's kind of falling into more minutes here for San Antonio. Over 30-60, I should say 35 and a quarter DK points in 4 of his last 5. And that one that he didn't kill you with 30 and a quarter in the blowout loss against Dallas, only 29 minutes in that one though. So he's been producing at a really solid rate, I'll say, and something, kind of more what we expected from the guy with DeRozan out of town to start the season. Derek White price is also coming way down on DraftKings at 5.4, but it's kind of in line with his poor play, at least what we've expected of him. So how are you kind of breaking down that mid-range for the Spurs?
I like Keldon quite a bit. I think that he is probably due for, he's getting more minutes like you said, but he's probably going to be the primary defender on Paul George, given his size. So I would expect him to play at least 35 plus barring foul trouble. So I like him quite a bit. I've been teetering back and forth between him at 6K or Draymond at 6'4" just about all day. It's tough. If I have no Spurs exposure, I think I might go Keldon. The other only hindrance I have with Keldon too is if this game does go small, he should obviously stick in the lineup. But Thad Young for $700 more is also very appealing to me for $5,300, given his stock ability. if this game goes small. My dependence on, or I shouldn't say my dependence, my use of Thad Young will depend what I do with the Clippers bigs too, though, because if the Clippers go small, I don't think I'll want to play Isaiah Hartenstein as much, which would then lead to me naturally fitting in more Thad Young. I don't know if I want to play him and Hartenstein together in a lineup.
So, talking about centers, Drew Eubanks 4-4, Thad Young 5-3. We had Hugo in there. I'm trying to keep up with his ever-changing screen names, talking about could you stack Thad and Drew in the same lineup. My answer was a pretty emphatic no. I don't know if there have been overlapping minutes. My answer was that there hadn't been, but Hugo seemed to think that there had been some in the recent past. Is that something that you like? I would personally set a rule against stacking those two in the same lineup.
I would too. I mean, I don't know, like you said, if there have been overlapping minutes, but my gut is telling me if there are, they've been very incremental.
Yeah, and I think they would mostly be matchup based and not something that the Spurs would be required to do tonight. Kyle, you kind of with us on that, and then talk to me about some of these, lower owned, lower priced guys: Devin Vassell, Lonnie Walker, and then even Doug McDermott, who I'm pretty high on as a low owned value.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on that rule. I think that's a smart rule to incorporate. I think Vassell, Walker, and McDermott are interesting, but you have Derek White there as well, who's a little bit too cheap in my opinion, 5,200 and 5,400. So he's also there. Like if you're not playing one of these cheap guys, you can just play Derek White. But also, if I had to pick, if I had to rank these three, I think I would rank them Lonnie Walker, then Vassell, then McDermott. I like McDermott too, though, especially on DraftKings. But on FanDuel, the price isn't as appealing. They're all three over 4,500, and Vassell's 5,700. So I think Lonnie would be my favorite on both sides.
Yeah. So I'm just high on Doug McDermott. I think he's small and power forward eligible, 3.6 though, and in this starting lineup, 24, 27, and 29 minutes in his last three games. Only 19 against the Thunder 4 games ago, but then 26 against Orlando the game before that. So the minutes are pretty solid in the mid to high 20s. We know Doug McDermott can not just bang 4 threes in a game, but can also get to the rim and score. Bigger body, I think, than most NBA fans realize. Has not shot the ball well and doesn't have a ton of opportunity. I guess I'm speaking out of turn here. Has shot the ball well. Has not had a ton of shot volume in this offense, though, with the increased usage for guys like DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, and especially Thad Young getting more minutes of late. But I just think he's going to be somebody that's way overlooked tonight. And I don't like a ton of these options below Patty Mills on the slate as a whole. So I think Doug McDermott, very sneaky. Lonnie Walker, though, to Kyle's point, also down to 3.7 and guard forward eligible, and somebody who is never shy about getting his own shots in this offense. Anything else from this game, or ready to take questions here for the last 5 minutes?
I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, same.
All right. Well, I will go ahead and cue these up here. Noche in here, a name that I haven't seen before. So if you are new, sir, welcome. He's asking Luke Kennard if Man is out. Joe.
Yeah, but it's going to be a popular line of thought. I think either way, I would rather go to Batum.
Kyle?
Yeah, I think he's fine. I think you can even potentially go with Winslow as the more contrarian option, though.
Yeah, that's what was going to be my point, is that I think if you can get Justice Winslow in there or have a plan to swap around, that would be something I would be interested in if you're playing in a large field tournament. I think it's pretty clearly Kennard if you're in any cashy format.
Yes.
If you're running one in single entry, and Joe, let's start with you since you are kind of the single entry connoisseur of the three of us. If you're running one, Durant or Harden?
Durant.
I'm also there. Kyle?
Yeah, same.
Kind of in my opinion, apologies, Anthony, a gross 2v2 here. And I lean the first one, but interested in your guys' opinion. Whiteside and Blake Griffin, or Drew Eubanks and Isaiah Hartenstein? Kyle?
First one.
I also lean one. Joe?
The Whiteside side. Ooh, I don't like that though.
Yeah, no, that's I told Anthony. I said I'm not a huge fan of either. Like, I don't think I'm getting my value from the center position today, especially if I'm only running one lineup. Ezekiel Alba, one of our listener league participants, chiming in with a lot of Spurs in this question, so I'm a fan of this one. Lonnie or Doug, which we just discussed, Kyle, and then Zubac or Thad. So Joe, Lonnie or Doug?
Oh, that's tough. I lean Lonnie. I think there's merit to both. If one lineup, I lean Lonnie. And then what was the other one?
Zubac or Thad Young?
I like Thad Young because I think this game runs small.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Joe. I prefer Lonnie and Thad as well.
All right, so double lunch bet, Lonnie versus Doug, DK points straight up.
Lonnie versus Doug.
Let's do
DK points straight up.
I got Doug. Right. You fools got Lonnie.
Let's do it.
I'm in.
Oh, God. Wednesday and Thursday lunches. Paid for.
Now I feel like I need to play Lonnie Walker, though. I don't like that.
Alex is chiming in here. FanDuel question, so we'll start with you, Kyle. Bledsoe at 6K or Jordan Poole at 5.7?
I prefer Poole.
I do as well. Joe?
Yeah, I agree.
Anthony, for I think like the third time today saying the Spurs still suck. Like I told you yesterday, man, once you say it more than once in a day, it loses its luster. It loses the magic. Just about 2 minutes here till lock. So if anybody has any questions leading up to main slate lock here, go ahead and fire away. Again, for those tuning in on YouTube or Twitter and are not subscribed to FTN Daily yet, you can get all your questions answered when you join ftndaily.com and join the Discord. Make sure you tag Joe, Kyle, and myself when you sign up. Say hi. We would love to have you. Anything else you guys that you think we missed, glossed over, or kind of want to circle back around? Let's talk Golden State Brooklyn for 30 seconds. We got those lineups. I don't think we read out the Warriors, but no surprises. Curry, Poole, Wiggins, Green, and Looney. Joe, if you had to roster one guy from Golden State outside of Steph Curry on DraftKings, who is it?
Draymond Green. 6'4" is just too cheap.
I agree. Kyle, if you had to roster somebody outside of James Harden or Kevin Durant on FanDuel, who would it be?
Like from the Nets or?
From the Nets, yeah.
It'd be Patty Mills.
Is it a bad idea to fade Durant, Harden, and George in a single entry? Joe?
Fading all three, I think it is. I like the idea of getting one of them. If you want to target the mid-tier, it's very easy to get one of them with those mid-tier guys.
Yeah, I agree. Kyle, you think that's just a terrible idea for your lineups tonight? Or, you could DeJounte Murray, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert. You could go mid-range.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I'm going to have in a few lineups for sure. Because there's just so many guys I think still have like 50, 60 point upside. But I think it is a stretch, especially because I do think Durant and Paul George specifically are really good plays.
How many Nets are too many with no Golden State Warriors run backs in DK GPPs? Joe?
Well, one of my builds has 4 Nets with 1 run back. I don't think I'd go more than 3 without a run back. I think 3 is fine because you look at the value on this slate. I think if you hypothetically Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, and Patty Mills, I don't think you need a run back there.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. I said more than 3. I think is
yeah, that was my long-winded answer.
Too much for me, and it also depends on who you're rostering, I think. But at this point, it doesn't much matter because we are at lock, and good luck to everybody. Let's pull up some ownership before we get out of here, fellas, and check out.
I got Lonnie Walker in my single entry just for our bet. I don't love it.
There you go.
But just for our bet.
I appreciate you. If you get cold feet, Doug McDermott, $100 cheaper.
Yeah, same price.
I mean, you could hedge. You play Doug McDermott in your lineup. He does well. You owe me. Lunch.
It's funny.
But you can pay me with your profits.
I'm not kidding. Before the lunch bet, I kind of went on a limb and said, you know what, fuck it, Lonnie Walker. After that. I went my lineup. I went from Bledsoe and McDermott to Lonnie Walker and Batum. So just for you.
Okay.
Maybe I'll switch back. Who knows?
Well, opening up the ownership here on DraftKings for the $450,000 NBA fadeaway, 100K to first. 2 crowns, DraftKings. What's on here? Trying to make all my friends crown rich. We'll go top 3 in this game, and as we did it last week, I'll start with Kyle. Kyle, since you are the optimizer ownership extraordinaire. Who is the highest owned player on DraftKings in this first game?
It's got to be Kevin Durant.
Kevin Durant, number 2. Joe, who's number 1?
I got to go Patty Mills.
Yeah, it's too easy after that.
Right?
Patty Mills,
right?
By 0.53 though, Kyle. So you were it's almost not fair when it's that close. You were pretty much right on it. Double Sammy Hagar here. Patty Mills 55.53. Kevin Durant 55 on the dot. Joe, third. Who's third?
Bruce Brown.
Bruce Brown, number 6.
Oh wow. Okay.
Which I like.
I don't think I even played him, to be honest. 3. Blake Griffin?
Blake Griffin, number 8. Lost your turn. Kyle, who's third?
Damn.
Wow.
Yeah, that's dope. Yeah.
Is it Harden?
Harden, number 5.
Is it Aldridge?
Aldridge, number 7. Draymond Green, 3rd.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And followed by Stephen Curry, 4th. So those two Brooklyn Nets at the top, Mills and Durant, 55%. Draymond Green, 3rd at 32%. Steph Curry right behind him at 29%. Then we're all the way down to a 20% owned James Harden, a 16% owned Bruce Brown, right next to a 16% owned LaMarcus Aldridge and Blake Griffin. 14% Andrew Wiggins, 11.5% Jordan Poole. Then we're into the single digits with Iguodala, Kavon Looney, DeAndre Bembry, 4.5%. That's not bad. Damian Lee, 3%. That's not bad either. And, the rest, looking at Gary Payton II, not terrible at 1.4%. Only have to play one share in a 20 max to get on top of the field there. So first game kind of under-owned from what I think, at least I expected. I think you guys kind of falling in line with that. I want to total this up and see what the ownership total is here because I'm pretty surprised.
Some of these are surprising. I really like Aldridge at 16%. I think people assumed he would start, but I don't think. Correct me if I'm wrong. Blake Griffin has been starting at the 5, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I like Aldridge a lot at 16. I like Blake Griffin at 16 a lot. I'm hoping. So I opted for Keldon Johnson over Draymond Green. So I'm hoping that Draymond doesn't do much. But that's I did not expect him to get up to the 3rd highest owned player in this game at all.
Yeah, and I don't think it was necessarily a surprise for me that he's 32% owned, but more so that those other Brooklyn values didn't garner hardly any ownership on a 3-game slate. Anything stand out to you there, Kyle? Is it kind of just the Bruce Brown, the Marcus Aldridge, lower owned Brooklyn Nets?
Yeah, I think. I think Patty Mills is a lot higher than I thought. I knew he would be popular, but I didn't think it would be the number 1. That could be the highest on the entire slate.
He just hit a 3 for the first bucket of the game too.
That was surprising. But then Blake Griffin and Aldridge both being fairly low, I do think was pretty surprising.
Yeah, I think, and I think Herm makes a good point here in the FTN Daily NBA Discord. 55% KD versus 20% Harden. He put it perfectly. I mean, come on, that's 2.5 times the Kevin Durant. That's a little bit much for me, even though all 3 of us did favor Durant straight up. I think if we would have seen those ownership numbers 15 minutes ago, we would have changed our tune slightly. Well, that's going to do it for us. A nice and easy 3-game slate here on this Dream Stream Tuesday. We appreciate everybody tuning in, whether you are a subscriber or maybe catching us for the first time on YouTube or Twitter. Again, you can use that promo code FTNTV to get 15% off either a monthly or an annual NBA package here at ftndaily.com. Guys, I'm looking forward to planning out my lunches the next 2 days. I'll be actually watching the Spurs game with great intent tonight, probably more so than almost anybody in the country. Appreciate you guys joining me as always. Always a blast to break down a slate with you two. So that'll do it for us. For Joe, for Kyle, I'm Zach. Shout out Thomas, our producer behind the glass. I don't have it queued up, but as always, let's get these beans. Good night.